Hey everyone! So glad to be back with with the Sci-Fi AI show. You may recognize us from the Daily AI show, but this is also one of our projects because, as you all know, we are living sci-fi, what used to be science fiction in our everyday reality. And today's topic, we're going to talk about it's Microsoft's Majorana's quantum chip. We had a conversation over on the Daily AI show about it, but there's so much about this that is so tied to science fiction and how we came to understand these kinds of things as possible. So that's what we're doing today. The promise of ultra stable qubits. Do we actually have a new form of matter? That is a little controversial. And the possibility of unlocking the computational power that then unlocks so many of the things that we know from science fiction, right? Is that more space travel? Is that propelling us through space? Propellation is not actually the word that I want, but we're going to go with it right now. Anyway, my name is Beth Lyons. I am joined by Junmi Hatcher and Andy Halliday, and you are watching or listening to the Sci-Fi AI show. Junmi, want to give us an orientation for our conversation today?
Sure. So, thank you, everyone who's joining with us today. But what we're going to be covering is the other half of quantum computing. Like Beth said, science fiction has been a guiding or motivation or even an inspirational force behind driving the latest science. Often we see that science fiction leads to science fact. And all of the things that we've seen in old sci-fi books and stories, things like the original Star Trek and whatnot, we are seeing the fruits of those ideas implemented in reality. It's no different for quantum computing. So there's lots and lots of different sci-fi sources that talk about quantum computing. And I think it's and in most of those sources, it's less about the technical aspects, like knowing how many qubits are created and how the particular chips, like Majorana-1, functions. Less about the technical part and more about what their possibilities are. And that's the big thing about science fiction, is you get a little bit of that science in there to give you an explanation of how these logical jumps and how these leaps in expression can lead to, that end result. So just to give you a basis of some of the science fiction that we'll probably be talking about today, is there's plenty of authors. I'm sure you've heard of, like, Isaac Asimov, artificial intelligence, and that basis of science fiction in the lexicon as a whole. Philip K. Dick, he's created a lot of these reality bending type things like that. And these are all great inspirations. Now, I have a few personal ones that I like. Now, I usually grab more from movies and television than from some of their books, but those are all found. You're muted. Okay.
Thank you. Junmi, you're cutting out a little bit and you're a little pixelated.
Gotcha.
So I love the books that you are referencing, but let's all go ahead and get Andy into the conversation as well. Andy, what? Yeah.
To Junmi's point that science fiction kind of precedes the science fact, science fiction has definitely inspired many young persons who are now actively involved in the development of quantum technologies and or pursuing science and engineering, generally speaking. Carl Sagan wrote once, "The reality of science must be preceded by the romance of science," and science fiction delivers that romance. science and engineering labs and NASA are filled with science fiction readers. And so it's, I think, relevant for us to talk about what has presaged the current developments and very recent developments of quantum computing specifically in science fiction. I wanted to point out something that I came across in my preparation for the show, which is a Pew Research study in 2024, just last year, found that 62% of the respondents believe that quantum computing can predict the future. And there are a number of such, magical capabilities that have been indicated in science fiction previously, but I just saw a TikTok literally yesterday about somebody who's claiming that somewhere in one of the labs, somebody who developed a 1,000 qubit, prototype found that it was predicting like a code that was then emerged as having been used to break into something the next day. That kind of thing, right? So this is where those stories, those science fiction narratives and/or actual leaks from inside the labs are what give this 62% of humans believing that there's multiverse capabilities, meaning there's another universe that you can traverse in different time frames, and so we can predict the future when we get to large-scale quantum computing. I'm particularly interested in talking through the Star Trek universe because Star Trek, as the original series, came out in 1966, and it had a number of things that it included in those discussions that even that early on suggested some kind of quantum capability. For example, the original series had quantum torpedoes. Now, what does that mean? We don't know, but and they didn't know either, really. But there were quantum torpedoes in there.
But they're bigger and better, or slower and more stable, or less. There's something,
right.
yes.
Or they can traverse space in instantaneously. They're entangled with the target. I don't know how the quantum torpedo works. Anyway, Junmi, test your broadcast here. Are you stable now? Not so. Okay. We don't hear you. We don't hear you.
Also, we can't hear you. So do the thing that Andy and Carl do when they leave and come back.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I believe the people who are
that
watching
is.
us are our old familiar favorites. So thank you so much for being with us. Andy, you're slightly pixelated too. But we can
strange.
definitely hear you.
But you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I wanted to just jump back on to the treatment in science fiction of quantum and advanced technologies. And quantum specifically and quantum theory has been poorly explained in media, and that's what gives rise to so many misconceptions about quantum. And because in the science fiction narratives, with exceptions that we'll cite here, which are really quite faithful to the actual science. Why? Because they consulted real laboratories that are working when they developed it. And those are more recent, like in the early 2000s, it starts to become something that is more closely allied with the realities of quantum developments. But in general, it's true that most people think that quantum are magical devices and that, so the narratives typically equated quantum. You use the term quantum in your script, and it's like this magical capability that, we don't know fully how to explain, but it's going to deliver those things. So I'm going to jump in, if you don't mind, into the Star Trek thing and just cite one of the very important treatments of quantum technology is from the Next Generation series, Star Trek The Next Generation, and specifically season 7, episode 11, called Parallels. And it is the one that provides the most explicit exploration of quantum theory's many worlds interpretation, right? This idea that, you can traverse multiverses using quantum technology. And there's even an implication in the most recent explanations of how quantum computing achieves its major advances against classical computing, that it's actually consulting with alternate universes in its process. I'm not convinced of that yet, but that episode, Parallels, does that. So what happens in that episode is Lieutenant Worf inadvertently traverses through quantum realities, and that demonstrates some key concepts from real quantum stuff, which is quantum signatures. The crew identifies Worf's RNA quantum signature anomalies to diagnose that he is actually interdimensionally displaced, right? Beth, you're muted, so you're either
No, I'm
going,
like,
oh, cool, okay,
yeah, that's very cool.
Then a space-time fissure in what is called a decoherence event in quantum technology. That space-time fissure destabilizes the multiverses, and 300,000 Enterprise variants coexist simultaneously. And I can remember the image of that with, just like a universe of Enterprises out there, each one of them independently in its own universe. And that idea is illustrating macroscopic quantum superposition collapse.
Okay.
So superposition is this possibility of quantum technology to have multiple states. And so when that collapses, what you do is you reveal the multivariate universes out there. And I'm not sure how to explain that other than to say, go ahead.
So the attention is, or whatever the thing that collapses that gives you one of the many that are happening simultaneously, that piece breaks. Yes.
I think that's as good an explanation as we can muster, I think, for what's really happening there. And then the third one that's in that context of the next generation is entanglement, right? And Geordi LaForge's visor, which contains 0.6 teraquad photonic processors, that interacts with subspace fissures in the episode, and that enables reality shifts. So I think that whole episode predates experimental verification of macroscopic quantum effects by almost 20 years. And yet it accurately frames entanglement as a universe linking mechanism, right? So now we understand that, a particle that is entangled with another particle in another universe, you can actually affect that other universe in that entanglement. We don't know how to create that entanglement right now across multiverses, but that's understood theoretically in quantum technology.
Okay, let's see, Junmi, go ahead and try. Nope, still can't hear you. Okay, go all the way out and come all the way back. I know, 2 minutes. So
he's done that twice.
Part of what, but you go all the way out. You like reboot or do something. Maybe you don't know what you do. From our standpoint, you disappear completely and come back.
And then we come back.
Not unlike you might do in a quantum kind of thing. So the transporter, so the visor, the visor thing is interesting. Is the photon, are we? What is a photon? Is it like photovoltaics? Is it a light-based thing, or is it an energy-based thing?
Well, if you understand in the quantum space, it's both a quanta and it is a wave. So photons have both properties in the quantum realm, and so they show behaviors of waves and they show behaviors of particles, and so it's not. There's duality there. It's duality. It's not that we're not sure which one. Which one depends on what you're measuring.
Right. So it's both and, but it is not light-based particular, like photovoltaics is a energy source from light, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So when we're talking about the the collapse and the entanglement between multi universes, and um, and we're not sure if AI is doing that or not, right? If that's part of what they're able to do, but we do assume that they are able to engage in many more dimensions than we are able to, right? Is that an established thing, or is that
Well,
um,
it's
theory?
clear that the quantum computing technology addresses many more possibilities in its probability assessment of which is the correct solution. So that, because of the sort of linear progression between the multiple states, like take a classical bit with 0 and 1. Well, a quantum computer sees not only the 0 and the 1 state, but the state where they're both the same, 0 and 1, and all the possibilities in between those two.
Okay.
Okay, in between 0 and 1. So yeah, it assesses and or comprehends a much wider range of those things. But I don't want to give up on the transporter discussion, because the transporter is pretty interesting, and it has some alignments with quantum technology, and it also has some departures from quantum technology.
Okay. Before we go there, just if you are, I don't know why you'd be watching the show if you are not as knowledgeable as my co-host friends here, but the way that I understand what you're talking about in terms of quantum being able to see the multiple possibilities is the way that I teach pulse as a form of music, of understanding music, before we start to do time signature and rhythm and meter and all of those things that are different, because pulse is not only the on, but also the container in which the on is done, right? So pulse is, it's not even a 1 yet, it's just a pulse. And then what you do with the pulse is you subdivide it, and that becomes how you're engaging in the time-based space in which rhythm happens, which is then the precursor for adding tone and all of those sorts of things. So I feel like this is really fun. The quantum possibilities within a single pulse, a single beat, because it doesn't have to have sound, but it's just easier to talk about it that way within that single pulse.
Interesting. Yeah.
Nice.
So in seeking an intuitive understanding of what quantum physics is, you've arrived at something that provides some intuition and an analogy for you. I think that's really great. I don't have that particular knowledge base, so I can't use that analogy very well. But going back to transporters, so Star Trek and the Star Trek technical advisors collaborated with the University of California, Santa Barbara's development of a concept called quantum teleportation. Now, here's how that's different from Star Trek's transporters. But I think it's really interesting that, a serious, a major advanced physics program is consulting with the Star Trek resources in order to describe and pursue research into quantum teleportation. So the biggest distinction is that Star Trek transporters, they dematerialize and reform objects. So it's a matter transfer concept. Quantum teleportation isn't a matter transfer as much as it is a transfer of quantum states via entanglement. So you don't actually dematerialize and then rematerialize in another location in quantum teleportation. You just detect the quantum state of a particle in this location, and via entanglement, could be entanglement across multiverses, you then transfer the quantum state to the other particles that are there. So if you could assemble a large number of particles, transfer the quantum states of all of those particles via entanglement to the set of particles that are assembling on the other side, you would in effect transfer matter. But quantum doesn't really talk about transferring matter, the actual particles, from one place to another. It just talks about aligning the spin and or the other quantum state definitions, and I couldn't enumerate them for you.
So
Now,
I
ahead.
think that I may have been able to hear Junmi. So let's see, because I've
Can you hear me now?
I
Yes,
can hear you now.
yes.
It's amazing what happens when you turn it off and turn it back on again.
That's the technical fix.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. All right. So I'm sure I missed a couple of things. Have you reiterated superposition? Because that's probably my favorite aspect of quantum computing.
Let's go back to superposition. Yeah. So superposition collapse is something that is referenced in one of the episodes of Star Trek, and or what they reference in the episode in Star Trek is similar to superposition collapse. So yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay. So one of the things that are explained if you watched our Majorana show or our quantum computing episode, and talk about the chip and how superposition is incredibly important for the formation of the qubits and the actual compute or processing part of quantum computing, right? So it's the state of being in all states, right? So in quantum computing, we use a bit of 0 or 1, but it's also all the states in the middle, right? And between those two, all those possibilities. This is where we get concepts of where that lead us to multiverse, leading us to every possible solution. And by us able to explore all of those possible solutions, we can highlight and find the actual solution that we're looking for. So one of the modern shows that recently came out that I have been enjoying is called Dark Matter. And it's on Apple TV if you want to check it out. And the main positive of that show is the main character, or actually one of his variations, created essentially a Schrodinger's cat situation, right? So that's the big example that's used in quantum physics about observation and superposition, right? You have this box with this cat in it, and because of the setup and because there's no information going in or out of this box, we cannot know what state the cat is in, right? Whether it's alive, dead, or whatnot. That means it's in all possible states. It's an example that's used to explore that concept of a state, something becomes real, so to speak, once it's observed, right? So the premise of this show is this character has designed this box, right, where you literally no information is coming in or out of it. And with the help of putting the human body into the human mind and body into a situation where it can accept other non-solidified or the concepts of the brain state, basically putting the brain in an altered state so that it can adapt to being in superposition, because the mind itself tries to coalesce or has an effect on our reality. How we perceive reality, it cements it into our mind. And so what this component, the drug component, is to put a human in an altered state, which is a great movie as well, so that it can handle being put into superposition. And so essentially it's a great first season about trying to find these variants, try different worlds. And it's an interesting take on how our perception of reality makes the reality we choose to connect with, and all the choices that we make create additional choices and branches and things like that. So I think it's a great example of what superposition could do for us. It's a way of multiversal hopping, but also the problems that come with that, and how would you be able to control those outcomes and things like that without giving too much of it away. But I know it's not exactly Star Trek, but I think it's a great example of superposition.
So what I wonder if that then answers one of the questions that you hear periodically about the transporter transporting, right? So the question is, if the transporter can put you back to, if the transporter takes you apart, moves your particles across like matter, puts you back together, why doesn't it heal you well in the process? It has a memory of a younger you, a healthier you, what you were like before the alien ate your liver, right? Like whatever that is, it has a memory of that because it took a picture of what you were like in the first state. But if it's traveling in entanglement, if you are just moving through your entanglement from this version of you to this version of you over in the other place, it wouldn't necessarily change you in that process. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think when
June.
I think when it's used in the Star Trek context, Star Trek has spent 60 years explaining transporters, and one of those, and that is an explanation of what's going through the process. Because
Okay.
yeah, you can speculate on their initial their initial explanation is breaking you down at the subatomic level and then streaming those particles and reforming you at the other end. And they were self-aware enough in a lot of the stories where they examine that you're not really doing that. What you're really doing is using local particles and coalescing a copy of you there. So there's a famous TNG storyline of how two William Rikers were created because of that process, and other storylines of like how Scotty trapped himself into a recycled buffer of that information, because as long as there's enough energy, the information is not going to necessarily degrade, and they were able to actually pull him out for a short period of time and added to a great storyline as well. One of my favorites as well.
Okay. And the matter one is Willy Wonka, right? TV Mike, TV somebody is the little kid in Willy Wonka. They do get like pulled down into particles. You watch them cross the ceiling and then put back together, but in a smaller version. Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Just another point about that is there's a quantum resolution dilemma that the transporter creates philosophically, which is how is consciousness preserved during dematerialization? Is it like sleep? Like I'm asleep during that period of time, or just unconscious? And the continuity of your consciousness, is that a function of matter, or is consciousness really a function of continuity? So that if you interrupt it,
right,
that's in effect a suicide that's subsequently reconstituted, but it's beyond the death. Anyway,
that's a great point.
That's later.
Well, that really goes into what the dark matter, the real introspective part, and that's the beauty of science fiction, right? Is it allows a quote unquote safe environment to explore really tough human states and realities, and what would you do in this situation, kind of thing. While it might be about science, it really is about our interaction in the natural world, right? And that it's an exploration of humanity,
right?
Yeah. On consciousness.
And I just want to hey, that is one of the reasons that we do the Sci-Fi AI show, and why we think it's such an important part of the discussion of AI advancement and technological advancement in general, because we have this framework for talking about we can do this, should we? And I don't know about you two, but for me, I feel like we're right there, right? In so many ways. Like, hey, this is something that is now, if not here already, likely to be here soon. So let's have these conversations about what like so much of this. Anyway, yes, Andy, go with your next thing. I just wanted to give a plug
Yeah,
for why
I'm
these
gonna,
exist.
good. Yeah, I'm gonna touch on a couple of other things that are interesting in terms of the collaborations between the UC Santa Barbara, um, and they developed a whole analysis called Science of Star Trek that is published somewhere. I'd like to try to find that, and that informs this idea of a quantum brain. There's a professor there, Matthew Fisher, who's working on quantum consciousness, which directly mirrors Picard, that series, Picard's positronic neuroscience. And then there's this idea in Star Trek of quantum neurotransmitters. And the franchise, Star Trek, uses this concept of psionic fields, which enables betazoid telepathy. And that aligns actually with the most recent 2025 experiments on entangled serotonin molecules as a basis for empathy and also for telepathy. So
Interesting.
pretty interesting. Yeah. Now, there's some other collaborations that are underway out there. For example, the National Science Foundation has funded electron teleportation experiments. So this is the idea of actually moving an electron from one atom to another. And they directly cited Star Trek transporters as inspiration in their grant application. So that experiment is underway. It's fairly recent. And then Microsoft, which is at the vanguard, of course, with Majorana, they have a division apparently called Station Q, which actually partnered with Star Trek technical consultants to develop the fault-tolerant qubits. Now, that's a reference in this research, this deep research on this subject, that predates last week's announcements about fault-tolerant topo conductors from Microsoft. So very interesting that there's this Trek influence, not only influence, but actual collaboration with the technical consultants that's related to the Majorana developments.
Yeah, I just pulled a comment on the screen from Cisco. To be honest, I think much of what we see as technology seems catalyzed by kids who watch Star Trek, or who at least had their imaginations opened in a way that could create a common enough foundation to then not be a solo innovator, but actually come together. Because all of these are definitely innovations done by ensembles or a group of people who have laddered their innovations on top of each other. And so that's important. The other thing that was in here was emergence. This may be something that we do in a future show, but Cisco said, is consciousness an emergent property? Is that?
I mean, that goes to like what Andy was saying early in Star Trek is the transporter brings up that conundrum is consciousness of the person, or is it recreated by your molecules and things like that. I think in these examples, what that question is explored, like I was saying in dark matter as well, is if we are put into a superposition situation, our brains are set up to solidify that concept. And one of the things they explore is, before you are able to experience the other realities, you have to release those locks, so to speak, right? And that's where consciousness might go into that entangled entanglement research, like for the betazoids that you were talking about, Andy, is it goes to explain the concept. And this is not a new concept. This has been around literally forever. Is that consciousness could be a shared experience, right? There's interconnection. Why you feel so interconnected? Yes, those could be chemical reactions, and that's how your physical body is experiencing them. But would that concept of if we have entangled serotonin, if we have entangled, you know, dendrite electrical pulses, or whatever to those levels, then sure, there is that possibility. And I think where this moves out of the science fiction or the spiritual realm into, or metaphysical realm into science fact, is we're able to observe and label, right? And that's an interesting thing. And I think that was brought up by our conundrum last Saturday, was because we have things that are described as spooky action at a distance, because of how quantum mechanics are the way it is explained, it almost sounds like, oh, here we want to put some labels and terminology on things that people have been exploring without the same kind of language to explain it before.
Right.
And so that you kind of get into a larger realm. So how much has been explained as folklore or experiences that people just did not have the same words and concepts that we do today to explain what those phenomena are. Right. That's how we go from legend to fact and things, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, when you were talking about the multiverse and the collapse of those universes, is we see them as universes because we can only experience a universe at a time. I am in this universe, and whether others exist or not, this is the totality of my senses and experience. If it's not, then we get into like woo. I'm not opposed to woo, but that's a different kind of thing. But AI may not be limited like us. And in fact, it looks like it's probably not. So does the AI, which is existing in my universe because I can communicate with the AI back and forth, is it also able to perceive the other dimensions, universes, like whatever that is? And that's one of the thoughts in terms of A Star, or whatever the new yes, I'm like a blast from the past of like maybe 6 months ago, maybe no, probably a year ago. But the idea of being able to self-train in a way by going through all of the possibilities of movement from this square to the next square, or to get out of the maze, or whatever those training things were, to be able to experience, to be able to test them all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Is that happening in the expansion of memory? It just has the ability to imagine these things, or is it literally running experiments because it has access to I don't know, like accordion time? Hey, we just need one right now. Ooh, now we have 100. Let's go. Right? Now we're just going to collect that back.
That's a great jumping off point for another Star Trek reference. So in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the main crux of the plot was that this entity had returned to Earth, right? And they realized what it really was, and that it was like, this was the old Voyager satellite that was sent out years ago, a machine culture, some think the Borg, or the precursor to the Borg at least, made the ship, the body around this, so that its simple programming was accomplishable, and that is to learn everything. And so it traveled the entire expanse of the universe and has returned to continue its programming because it realized that it could not accomplish its goal without that human interface. And the human interface it was looking for is to conceive of things that are not real. Its programming was to experience the universe as it is, and how can we go beyond that unless we have additional input, additional concept of what is beyond, what is flights of fantasy which could be real. What is that multiversal aspect? And that was the main question of that film. And so I think that goes to everything that we've been talking about so far, the multiversal aspect, the try all of those different options, and find what's real, and to be able to, or I shouldn't say real, but find out what's working for the solution. But if you have that will or motivation behind it, the larger question is what's out there, right? What are the options? What things have we not seen yet? What more can we observe? And exploring more the multiverse, because every possible thing based on every possible choice is theoretically possible. We could have this similar conversation in a different reality where it's as simple as the color of the shirt we're wearing is a little different, or it could be wild where we're all cat and lizard people, just wildly crazy divergence of multiversal possibilities, which I think is fantastic.
Okay.
Now, to
So
link this back in. Okay.
no, you're good. I just want to say this is not worth interrupting, but I already have. Our production budget for this show right now is fairly low. So I want everybody just to take a minute and close your eyes and imagine that we just all morphed into cats and lizard people to give that a visual. And then now we're back.
Okay, good.
Right.
Okay. Beth Liz Lyons. Okay.
There you go.
I want to jump over to a little exercise I did, which is I wanted to look back into history. And I asked the question, where are the scientifically grounded quantum narratives where they first occur, and how far back can you see something that's actually, prescient about what's going on, but it was in the imagination of a science fiction writer. So this is looking at not just television series, but also novels and short stories and other media, short films, long films, etc. And I don't know if it's exhaustive, but it goes pretty far back. So in 1977, Gregory Benford did I don't know what it is, a book probably, In the Ocean of Night, a science fiction novel, which predicted quantum annealing concepts and modeled alien AI as topological qubit arrays. This is way before the qubit era, which is very recent, right? So, and then there's another one in 1977. It was a seminal year for quantum prescience. And these people must have traversed the multiverse and come into the future in order to understand these things. John Varley wrote the Ophiuchi Hotline, and that featured quantum entangled communication relays with light speed latency constraints, aligning with what 2025's quantum repeater designs show.
Yeah.
So pretty amazing. Now I want to jump way ahead in a moment to the opposite end of the spectrum, which is fairly recent stuff that's way technically problematic. Like it doesn't even, compare to what the realities of quantum technology are. But there's one other that I want to mention, which is as early as 1992, an author, Greg Egan, and I haven't read any of these, by the way. Quarantine used wave function collapse as a plot mechanism, accurately depicting decoherence-induced reality shifts, 15 years before weak measurement experiments showed it to be true. So, wow, amazing. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, as I said, there's a bunch of things that are technically problematic portrayals in media, And the one I want to start with is Rick and Morty in 2013 showed the quantumizer, a device that would enable infinite multiverse traversal. Okay, that's a good one. In 2014, Transcendence, which is, I think, a pretty major film release, uploaded consciousnesses, achieve godlike power via quantum cloud, something out there. And it ignores a whole bunch of principles of quantum reality. And then there's another one that's referenced, which is The Fifth Element, another one that I think I've seen. I've seen this. Was 1997, so a little earlier. And in there, they had a quantum physics weapon, which destroyed planets via some undefined energy inversion. And that violates a theorem in quantum called the no communication theorem. But anyway, those are the two ends of
Fifth Element. Yeah, Fifth Element was not focused on explaining the things that happened. I mean, literally, what that weapon you're talking about is a entity that was summoned into our reality every 5,000 years to go blow up the earth. And that's how we have the moon, because they were able to use the fifth element and the divine weapon that it was able to activate, which was Mila Jovovich, and stop the new celestial body. So in the year 25 something, there's now two moons. But I won't go too much into
that's
the details
fascinating.
of that. It's one of my favorite movies. I love Luc Besson.
An illustration of the vast quantum memory of Junmi Hatcher. That's quantum memory right there, just bringing forth the actual details of the film that I conveniently forgotten over the years.
Well, one I will say there is one point I wanted to, and we've kind of skirted this concept so far, but I wanted to bring back to one of the things that quantum computing could bring to us because of all of the qubits and the processing and being able to check all those realities, inversions, and superposition things is simulation. Right. So we talked about real world applications, the protein folding, drug creation, molecule analysis, cut down on AI development, training, all of those kinds of real world things. But one of those real world things is to create better simulations. Now, there's this concept about virtual reality, virtual worlds, simulations, that if you have enough compute, if you have enough power, and your array is large enough, you can simulate more and more of the variables, especially if those variables become microscopic, atomic, subatomic. But you can calculate all those variables, right? If you have all of the information, you could know where everything is at any given point in time, right? And that's what a really highly defined simulation is, okay? So if you could identify where every particle and wave is happening, and you put in, I don't know, rendering limits, such as nothing can travel beyond this speed, this velocity, then it would give your system enough time to generate what it comes after the observable horizon. So, because we can only perceive and record and censor as far out as our technology allows us to. But if there's a universal constant, then that means anything beyond that doesn't necessarily need to exist or be rendered until we achieve the locality, the space-time part of that continuum to observe what needs to be observed. Sounds like a video game, but it also sounds like our existing reality.
So one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes, and I'm pretty sure it was from the rebooted Twilight Zone because it was blue men and they were in color. So clearly it was a reboot since the original Twilight Zone, I think, was in black and white. But it postulated why you can look for your keys exactly on the table where you know you left them. They're not there, and when you come back, they are. And so it was an explanation for that, and the explanation was like these men in blue suits actually are running ahead and putting things back in all the places. Now, obviously, based on what you just said, that would be an automated thing, right? Like the simulation would not need
Mhm.
humanoid blue men running ahead in order to put a physical object there. But the
Right.
idea that our reality is actually being created a couple of frames ahead of us, and that there are some things that might drop but be informed by the reaction to the drop when reality catches up, and be able to like come back in like, oh no, psych, no, look again, the keys are right there, right?
Yeah, it's simply a glitch in the matrix,
Oh, okay, we're gonna have movie night
right?
at some point, I think, but
What and I think I've mentioned this in before in conversations, but one of the greatest examples of a simulated world or simulated reality um, exploration of that is called The 13th Floor. Not the best movie, but the sci-fi concept, I think it did really well. Because the basic premise of that movie is all of these things that are happening. Uh, outside forces are encroaching on the main character and his plot, and he's trying to figure things out. And it's all because he and his company created a virtual world that was using some sort of supercomputer or quantum computer to to generate that simulated world. And they got so good, they were able to create it down to every observable particle that was needed and create an entire reality. And all of these characters, all of these people were living their own reality and going through their own history up here in the system that was on the 13th floor. And it comes down to all of these things are interacting with him, and he's seeing it as an encroachment, an attack, and everything like that. And it's merely different factions of a we'll call it a over reality that was investigating how this happened. Why was it turning on? One was a more aggressive faction, one was a more benign faction, and the benign faction reveals to him, this is the first time one of our simulations created a simulation of their own. And that's why it was so important. And he and his 13th floor and his company and the world that he lived in was a simulation of theirs that they had created. So you kind of get into that Inception. That's another great film about layers upon layers of diving deeper and deeper layers of reality, things like that. So quantum computing offers us the ability to do simulations. And if scaling works, if that million qubits that they're saying that the Majorana chip could for platform, right, could build out to, how far is it until we can make a real enough simulation of our own?
wow. Yes, exactly. Andy, you're muted, but do you I'm thinking we should probably look toward wrapping up.
Yep,
Um
we're there. We just had our mind blown there on that one, and my my qubits are overwhelmed.
All right. So let's wrap it up there. Thank you so much to our live audience. This is one of the ways that we think we're going to move the Sci-Fi AI show forward is to do these lives periodically. We were thinking once a month, but next week the Daily AI show is talking about robots, and I'm guessing we're going to want to have a robot conversation. So stick with us and we will figure out how often we're going to do this. Thank you so much for all the great comments. If you're watching this afterwards, please comment also. We're trying to build a community around this conversation because those of us who are familiar with sci-fi concepts are having these moments all the time. Like, whoa, oh my God, right? What we refer to as holy crap moments. That time when you're like, hey, computer, and the computer says, yes, would you like to continue from where you left off? Right? I mean, we're totally there, except our wiretap ladies are a little dumb still. And I don't say her name because she's going to start talking. Any of them are going to start talking. But yeah, thanks so much. Tell your friends, and we'll see you next time.
Aloha.